Hey guys, Mr. Thibodeau here. Just going to jump into our stuff for uh, today. Starting off with the printing press. The book does a number of things wrong here, and the first off is Gutenberg did not invent the printing press. Did not. Uh, he developed movable type. Okay, so the book here, first off, it's like he invented the printing press. He did this by taking essentially the printing press that the Chinese had and added movable type. Okay, so they sort of give Chinese credit, but the Chinese literally had a printing press. They called it a printing press, in Chinese. But I guess that's not. I don't know. Anyway, he definitely is important. Okay, it's super important. His addition. Okay, the movable metal type is pivotal to being able to use these frequently and quickly. Okay, where the Chinese would do a page at a time, and that whole page had to be carved out. The movable metal type meant that you didn't have to redo. You didn't have to carve over and over and over again all of these pages. You can just like slide them in there and then print it and then change it up, slide them in again. It was way faster and much easier once you had the letters, right? You only need to print. You need to have multiple copies of each letter, right? Capitals for each one, and you need to have enough so that if there's 20 A's on a page, you had 20 A's, right? So you did have to have a lot of stuff, and it was a lot of work putting it together, but it was way easier than a single block, wood block that they had before. Now, partly China didn't have as much iron and steel as Europe did. They didn't have as much access to it. So Gutenberg, of course, was a little bit better off in that regard. But um, super important, his movable type. But I refute the idea that his invention was the printing press when the Chinese literally had a printing press. Um, Active printing was crazy important. It really shows 500 books in the same time as it would take to make one. Okay. Uh, really important. And these books are going to change everything. Real quick, a Gutenberg Bible is one of the most expensive books in the world. If you can get a hold of one of those old books that still exists, crazy. 50 of them survive today, and they're very expensive. Legacy of the art, you see a lot of different things that are done. I do want to point out that it talks about Greek and Roman ideas, and it always frustrates me because you cannot talk about the dome without talking about the Middle East. Okay, folks in the Middle East and the various Muslim empires, specifically in the Golden Age of Islam, they revolutionized how to build these domes. Okay, and to not give them credit is, I think, just astoundingly naive and ruthless. The Greeks and Romans absolutely influenced the various folks in the Middle East. I mean, it's hard to say because it's more than one country now, but it's so it's hard to. I guess the Islamic nation at the time, or the various Islamic nations, because there's more than one. In any case, they were influenced by the Greek and Romans, and then they took those innovations and they added more to them, and then the Europeans took the Greek, the Roman, and the Middle Eastern ideas all together and brought that back to Europe. Okay, got a lot more authors, humor, various things. Machiavelli, you might have heard of. He's the one who says the ends justify the means. People talk about him as Machiavellian, as in it's okay to be ruthless if you have good intentions. Okay, so all villains sort of have this Machiavellian sort of take on things. Okay, potentially Gutenberg's printing press is the greatest invention of the past 1,000 years. Could be. I mean, there's argument. Yeah, sure. Why not? We get Descartes, who creates x plus y equals 5 and allows us to create various equations. Generally, at this point, they're just doing x plus 2 equals 5, and then you'd be able to find x. Okay, it was an unknown variable. Having two variables in there, that comes later. But anyway, astronomy, we get Da Vinci, we get all of these like really cool things happening. Church. Okay, so a lot of stuff to talk about here. Definitely the Catholic Church messed up with these indulgences. This was not great. This was real bad. Full disclosure, I am Catholic. So you have my bias there, but this was a bad times. A few things to know. One, this was not known as the Great Schism. Okay, that's if you look on the internet, the Great Schism is when Rome and the Eastern Roman Empire split, and the church split there as well. Okay, this is the Greek Orthodox versus the Roman Orthodox. Okay, that is the Great Schism. The Occidental Schism, or the Western Schism, or the Schism of, was it 13 something or other? 1347, I think. We talk about it here. So if you're looking for 1054 is known as the Great Schism. Okay. So for the East-West Schism of 1054, also known as the Great Schism, right? The Western Schism, known as the Papal Schism, the Vatican Standoff, or the Great Occidental Schism, right? They don't generally call it the Great Schism because that's very clearly the one in 1054, okay, when Rome split. Very occasionally, this affair is sometimes referred to as the Great Schism, although this term is mostly used for the other one, okay? So I think it's really weird that the book decided to call it the Great Schism, even though that's like the worst name for it. So the reason why I had this pulled up, though, is this right here. I thought was the best way of looking at it. The book messes up, and so there wasn't 2 popes, guys. There was 3 popes. Okay, so in Avignon, in France, they're like, okay, or so a pope dies in Rome. And the Romans try to, or the folks in the Vatican try to install the next pope. But the folks in France, because again, remember, there's this huge debate about who's got more power, the kings of these nations or the church, okay? And France right now is the big superpower. France is the inheritors of the Holy Roman Empire. And for the most part, France at this point controls much of Germany and technically controls or supports the most of what is Italy, the Italian states. Okay, they're basically independent, but they're sort of supported. It's kind of a vague deal. So France has Avignon, and they decide they're going to elect their pope. And they don't want it to be in Rome. They want it to be closer. So France, in the city of Avignon, creates their pope. Okay, and in Rome, they have their popes. Now we have 2 popes. And they're like, oh, this is crazy. You got it. You guys can't have your pope. And they're like, yo, you guys can't have your pope. And so like, fine, we'll have a 3rd pope. Except that doesn't really solve any of the issues. So for a while, they're like, so Gregory the 11th dies. Urban the 6th and Clement the 7th, both like really quickly became popes for a while. Okay, that lasts for 10, 20 years, depending on which one. And they just keep going. Boniface the 9th, Innocent the 7th. Finally, there's Alexander the 5th, but we're going to ignore him because that didn't work well. John the 13th, okay, comes into play, and they're like, okay, Benedict is wrong, Gregory is wrong, we're going straight to John the 3rd, anti-pope John the 3rd, and his goal was, I guess, to like Piso is like, hey, like Rome and Avignon have theirs, like we're gonna have ours. It was a mess. Finally, they sort of settled on Martin V back in Rome. It's like so long, guys. This is 50 years of multiple popes. It was a mess. Okay. Finally, Martin V is going to be the solo pope. It's going to take a while for Clement to bow out, but he will. Gregory bows out on purpose. This time frame here, I'm not as familiar with exactly why there was a space for they didn't have a pope. I think that's wrong. I think it goes from Gregory right to Martin. I think that's supposed to be this touching, because I think John, the anti-pope, gives up. Gregory gives up. They put Martin in, and then they slowly get these guys. Anyway, so that's the Western Schism, not the Great Schism. Whole big deal, and not really fun times for the Catholic Church. What's going to happen next, okay, is a big deal. Martin Luther actively protesting against these practices. And he's not alone. There's a lot of Catholics who did not like these practices. These practices were straight up awful. They were not really adhering to the goals of the Bible, okay? And so Martin Luther thinks they're awful, and he really wants people to be able to read the Bible in their own language, okay? The Catholic Church is not really a fan of this, and for many reasons, okay? One of the main ones, I'll give you kind of a personal story. I've gotten into many debates with people about what the Bible means, what's going on in it. And somebody might say, well, it says right here in English what it says, like it's clear as day. It says it in the Bible right here. Except the thing is if you're going to quote the Bible to make an argument, but you do it in English, or you do it in French, or you do it in Italian, or you do it in any language that's not the original language it was written in, there are translation errors. No matter how hard you try, there will always be issues with the translation, because when I look at an English sentence, okay, I can look at a lot of different meaning from that English sentence that may or may not actually be there in its original language. And what's also important is in the original language, there's also a lot of different conventions that we don't use anymore and we may not be familiar with anymore. Whereas we have a lot of conventions that we're using in English today when we write different stories and different allegories and parables, or all of these different things. So it's really, really hard to make an accurate translation, okay? And so I always get frustrated talking to these people who make these arguments based on what they read in English, but they're not as familiar with the actual Latin. And I'm not super familiar with it, but I always, if I'm going to make an argument, I do my best to study up on that part, or even the Greek, depending on which where the Bible's coming from and what's going on, and Hebrew sometimes too, if we're talking Old Testament. In any case, there is a reason that when you translate it, okay, there are issues, and so the Catholic Church still believes, or believed especially back then, that if we just let people read the Bible for themselves, they might come away with their own ideas. You might have people who, see Jesus preaching about, helping the poor and giving money to Caesar, what is Caesar's, and somehow turning it to a gospel about how you should get rich, okay? And we see that today. We see people who take the Bible and cherry pick what they want out of there to make their own argument, right? And so the Catholic Church was quite worried about this happening, okay? About people who don't really understand the Bible but using it for their own works, okay? Now, that's their argument. That doesn't mean they're right, okay? That was the Catholic Church's worry. And they were working and they were having these debates inside the Catholic Church at the time, okay? My hero, Desiderius Erasmus, was a colleague of Martin Luther in that they were working together for this Reformation. Martin Luther gets upset, okay? He gets upset at how slowly the Catholic Church is moving. And what he does is he writes his list of issues, the 95 Theses, and he posts these to a door in Wittenberg, Germany. Now, here's the issue. Here's why he gets in trouble. Writing these theses is not a crime. Okay, the Catholic Church has no problem with that. The Catholic Church has a problem with when he writes it in German. when he writes it in German and he sticks it on a door of a church in Germany, any German who can read, which admittedly is not that many, could read this or have it read to them. Martin Luther took this internal debate that the Catholic Church was having and made it public. That was his biggest crime, according to the Catholic Church. That was the problem they had, why he was set to be excommunicated. That was a really big issue because the Catholic Church was moving slowly on trying to figure out whether or not to let people read in their own language. There was some belief they would change, some belief they wouldn't. But when he makes this argument public, the Catholic Church now has to make a decision. And they decide that Martin Luther is wrong and that they will not, and that he needs to recant if he wants to stay in the church. This is why the Protestant Reformation happens, okay? I don't know what would have happened if he had just kept his arguments to the church and instead of making it public. Maybe the Catholic Church would have changed. Maybe it wouldn't have changed. Maybe he was right. It's one of the big questions in history. But the Protestantism grows, okay, because he takes these ideas, and remember, the kings of the nations are really frustrated with the Catholic Church because they do not like sharing power with the church. And the Catholic Church is very, very powerful. And so Protestantism gives them this new opportunity. If they become Protestant, they still have a path to heaven, and they can have more power. You will see that most Protestant religions are the king is part of the religion. Specifically in England, okay, when Protestantism gets there, the head of the Protestant church is the Archbishop of Canterbury, but he shares that power to some extent with the King of England, or in this case, the Queen of England. And so because of that power, kings are going to be really, really happy with Protestantism in some situations, okay? Not all of them, okay? France and Spain stay very, very Catholic. So does Italy, okay? The Italians. But over in Germany, in these smaller areas, they absolutely go full Protestant. Over in England, they will eventually also go full Protestant, okay? We get some pretty good bits here. Want to talk a little bit about this Counter-Reformation, okay? Another one of the reasons why the Catholics, so the Protestants specifically say, everything in the Bible, that's where the Word of God is. That's anyone can read it, anyone can find it. We don't need a church to tell us what to believe, okay? But now the Catholic Church, their take on it is, hey, we wrote the Bible. We put it together, 1,000 years ago, and we put what we thought was important in there, but we didn't put everything in there. There were other books that were divine that weren't necessarily part of, that we didn't think everyone needed to have a copy of, that was part of the Bible. That's the Catholic Church's, position, is they had all of this extra stuff that wasn't necessarily in the Bible, but they still believed it to be important, okay, divine or partially divine, various things. And they're like, we not only do we have that, but we also have all of the tradition of what came before, okay? All of the things that didn't need to be written down, okay? This idea of common law, which is pretty, I guess, common at the time, where it is not something that had to be written in the book, but was understood to be true or understood to be God's word. That's the Catholic's point of view. Protestants are like, no, if it's not part of this book, then it's not part of the church. And this issue, is a big deal. What I think is really interesting here is when the Council of Trent, the First Council of Trent, really, comes back and they decide how the church is going to connect and unify and to fight the Protestantism, they actually ban many books by Erasmus. Erasmus, remember, stayed Catholic. He did not join Luther. There was a lot of pressure for him too. He wanted a lot of the changes that Luther did. but he believed he would do better staying Catholic. And yet, the Catholic Church will eventually ban his books because his books had the same ideas that Luther did. How is that for loyalty? So the Catholic Church burns a lot of books. They start book burning, and they start being really, really against a lot of these ideas because they're really worried about change. It was Luther and his change that caused them to have these problems to begin with. And so now they're worried that any more change might cause a bigger threat to their power. Which I think is a really sad order of events. I really, that the Catholic Church at this time was so worried about any new ideas. And they really wanted to keep things frozen in time. They also began an Inquisition, which does awful things to Jews and Muslims and many other folks, Protestants, of course. Very awful stuff. This Counter-Reformation did good things, but also a lot of real bad stuff. The Jesuits, the Soldiers of Christ, Superior General is their leader. They were warriors of Christ, but specifically warriors of knowledge for the greater good, glory of God. They believed that they could best fight evil with books and with knowledge. The Jesuits, of which our current Pope, or the current Pope, sorry, you folks aren't all Catholic. The current Pope, Pope Francis, is the first Jesuit Pope, which is kind of a big deal. They were all about knowledge and trying to bring this knowledge and this learned sort of behavior to folks. They've always been much more outspoken for various causes. Very interesting group of folks. But in the Catholic tradition, if you're not familiar, when you sort of join an order, you kind of join a specific sort of school of thought of how you're going to praise and glorify God. The Benedictines, they believed in praising God through works, okay? So farming was a way of praising God, okay? You are doing work that is good. You are producing food, which is also why so many Benedictine monks brew beer, is because brewing beer is a way of praising God. That seems funny, right? But keep in mind, beer mixed with water or alcohol mixed with water is the easiest way to have clean drinking water. So, it's a little different than what we think of today. The Jesuits, their goal was to spread knowledge. The Knights Templar, their goal was to create safety in the Middle East, or it's a little unclear. Their goal was to make the roads safe, and they ended up getting very rich from that, and then eventually betrayed. That's a different deal. Lots of different groups or orders of monks or priests or knights within Catholicism. Anyway, that's basically all I got for you guys. A lot of political effects. My main question for you guys, okay, and this is a big one. Was Martin Luther right to start this split? When he got upset with how slowly the Catholic Church was moving, and he put his theses on the wall, okay? His goal was good, right? He wanted people to be able to read the Bible themselves. But was his goal, looking back, as it splits the Catholic Church into different parts, and now, sure, people can think for themselves, but we also get all of these fights. We have wars. People are dying. There's massive amounts of fighting. When the Catholic Church was one, there was very, very little fighting between any of these different nations. They did not fight each other as much as when they became different religions. Once they became different religions, they felt that they were no longer all connected by the common religion, and thus began fighting each other. Okay, so Was Martin Luther to blame for that? Did he do wrong by his putting the thesis there? Should he have stayed and waited to see if the Catholic Church would have eventually gotten and evolved the way he wanted it to? Or did he make a mistake, or was he right? I think it's an interesting debate to go there. So I just want to hear your opinion on there. There is no right answer, but I just want to see where you're thinking for that. Okay, just because it's interesting. So it's a tough question. All right, have a good day, guys. Bye.